President.
You whip.
Mr. President, I'm sure that you, more than most members of the Senate, remember our debate of a few weeks ago on the Voting Rights Act. I remember your statement on the floor. It was powerful and really spoke to the truth of why we were meeting and debating this issue. We realized that sadly, since the Civil War, when African Americans were finally given the right to vote, this has been a battle every year since. And yesterday, a Supreme Court decision tells us that we still have a battle to fight when it comes to the voting rights in America. By a 5-4 vote yesterday, the Supreme Court's conservative majority allowed Alabama lawmakers to move forward with a congressional districting map that diminishes the power of black voters in a state where black Americans account for more than 25% of the population, the state of Alabama. You see, this case had been considered by a 3-judge district court panel in Alabama, and they ruled in a unanimous decision, Mr. President, that the map likely violated the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And they ruled that we should block that map because it would deny the right to vote to African Americans. I might say for the record, this 3-judge panel, 2 of the 3 judges were appointed by former President Trump. And yet they came to that conclusion. So the Supreme Court had a decision whether to go along with this 3-judge panel and to stop the implementation of this map until they could have a full hearing on the subject or allow them to go forward. And sadly, by a 5-4 vote, the Supreme Court's conservative majority refused to stay, did stay, I should say, a lower court's decision where they ruled unanimously that the district map was discriminatory. The Supreme Court did not issue a well-reasoned decision. They issued no decision. They did so on what is known as the shadow docket. We're seeing it more and more by this court. No explanation, no full briefing, no signed opinion for the majority. What we have was scant reaction by the court, but I do want to note that Justice Kagan wrote that decision by the Supreme Court in favor of allowing this Alabama map to go forward, quote, does a disservice to the district court which meticulously applied this court's longstanding voting rights precedent. She went on to note that, quote, most of all, it does a disservice to the black people of Alabama who under the precedent had their electoral power diminished in violation of the law this court once knew to buttress all of American democracy. Mr. President, yesterday's decision is the latest example of the Supreme Court hacking away at the protections of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, one of the most important civil rights laws in our history. A law singularly responsible for decades of progress in minority representation in public office. As a result of these decisions, legal protections for voters of color throughout the country are being systematically dismantled by the Republican Party through state legislatures and sadly by our federal courts. So now what do we do? Well, Congress must act. We must restore the Voting Rights Act to its full power and potential, and we can do that by enacting the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act Advancement Act. This legislation would strengthen and modernize the Voting Rights Act's protections, including by requiring Supreme Court justices to actually explain their reasoning behind their decisions when they overturn a lower court's decision on a voting rights case. Is that too much to ask? That the Supreme Court explain to the American people why they are overruling a lower court's decision which says Americans are being discriminated against when it comes to their right to vote? I don't think the Supreme Court is that busy that it can't tell the American people its logic behind these decisions. Every day we're seeing the consequences of this Senate's failure just a few weeks ago to protect the right to vote. Mr. President, you and I agree, we cannot wait any longer.